Welcome everyone to the online summit for autism. I'm your host Nick Fransen. We're here with Mary Coyle, who is a expert homeopath. She's going to give some great information about autism. She's been treating it for many years, very successfully. Mary, nice to see you today.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks for having me.
Mary, why don't you give us a little bit of introduction how you got into the field of autism? I know you've got a great story.
Sure. I got into the field of autism about 15 years ago. My son, when he was 5 years old, was diagnosed, or 2 years old, was diagnosed with autism. And through a series of a lot of different interventions, we ended up finding homotoxicology when he was almost 5 years old. And from that, from his success, a lot of parents started asking me what we were doing, and I was helping them along, and it just got to be so busy that I eventually gave up my career in the chemical industry. And in 2000, I became a full-time homotoxicologist. You know, I have a degree in homeopathy, but I go to most of the training I have is in homotoxicology.
Now, homotoxicology is a term typically mainly used by homeopaths. I mean, I know it can be used by others. Tell us exactly what homotoxicology is and how does it work?
Yeah, homotoxicology was created by Dr. Reckeweg. He's a German MD in the 1940s, and he figured out that there are a lot of toxins in our fat and connective tissue, and probably one of the better ways to get it out is by actually going back to the pioneers of our past, like Dr. Hahnemann, who created classical homeopathy, and using that energetic system, cures like, to get the toxins out. So what Dr. Reckeweg did was he sort of created the bridge between allopathic therapeutics and homeopathy. So it's sort of a modern form of homeopathy, where you're using light cures like to trigger the body to remove its endogenous body toxic burden.
Now, a lot of people would probably say homeopathy, I just don't think it's going to be strong enough to deal with the problems that my son has with autism. What would you say to someone who has a sort of response like that?
Well, that's what I would have thought too. But homotoxicology is it's a very powerful program. And it's safe, which is two things that you want to use when you're dealing with very compromised individuals like autistic children. The reason why I think it's so effective is that when you work on an energetic system, your body is able to tune in to the signals that are being presented to it. So for example, no matter how compromised you are, if you take a fork and put that fork in a light socket, regardless of how your health is, you're going to get a shock. But if you're working on the biochemical level, and you're asking your body to do a lot of things, which requires breaking down and assimilating those particular substances, and that requires a lot of energy, a lot of times your body can't do that. So it's almost like if you're running a marathon and you weigh 500 pounds, if you have a whip behind that person, you might be able to get a couple extra miles out of them, but at one point they're just going to tank. What homotoxicology does, especially the energetic products, it puts the energy into the body so that they can finish the race. So it's deep, it's intracellular, but it's self-regulating too. So the body's not going to, if you're doing a heavy metal detoxisode, for example, you're not going to get rid of all of your heavy metals like lead, beryllium, cadmium, mercury at once. If your body can only get rid of 2% of it, that's all that's going to come out because it's a self-regulating system. That's why nobody's ever died on homeopathy. But the body is going to tune into those signals, and you can verify it, and there's been lots of studies done that's verifying that these toxins are coming out. It's been shown through hair analysis, blood mineral analysis, urine analysis. You can track it yourself. You can see these toxins mobilizing and moving out to excretion.
Very nice. Autism, you've been treating it for years. What do you see is going on? Why is it on such a rise? Why is it really just exploding and continuing to explode? What's happening? Is it the vaccines? Is that the cause? Are there other factors?
Yeah, I think that it's a total load problem. I think that every generation is becoming more and more compromised. We're passing down a lot of toxins in utero, through the umbilical cord, through our breast milk, and and then being hit up with pharmaceutical interventions right when they're born. A lot of times the kids they're introduced to foods they can't really tolerate, and they come down with acid reflux and rashes and ear infections, and then they're all suppressed with antibiotics and other pharmaceuticals, and it's just a combination of a little boat that's getting filled up with sand, and we just keep putting more and more sand in that boat, and then eventually the boat begins to sink. And in my opinion, the toxins are now being built up in the fat and the connective tissue. Too much garbage is going in, not enough garbage is going out, and then the toxins begin to go intracellular, and then they start hooking onto the organelles, and then the body's not working at 100% anymore. Now you're at 90%, 80%, 70%, 60%. And when your fuel metabolism is compromised and the body's under enormous stress, inflammation then can happen. And then the cellular toxicity issue occurs, and because of the inflammation and the bilipid membrane of the cell become very rigid, and the metabolic waste inside the cells has trouble getting out, and the nutrients have trouble getting in, so you have this negative feedback situation going on. So what I like again about homotoxicology is that it's addressing those particular issues safely and gently, and enabling the body to start moving these toxins out first in the fat, the connective tissue, and then intracellularly. So initially you want to take as much stress off the body, because if autism is somewhat a maladaptation to stress, you want to get rid of course, the big guns, the obvious problems like pesticides and chemicals in your home, and make sure your drinking water is clean and that the air you're breathing is clean. And then you want to go into what you're putting into your body. You want to make sure that you're not eating foods that are causing sensitivities or inflammation. That's huge right there. And then according to homotoxicology principles, you're going to want to go in next with drainage remedies. And drainage remedies are not detoxifiers. They increase the metabolic system of certain organs and give it the strength to start moving toxins out. And they're specific drainage remedies for specific organs, like Solidago is specific to kidney, Crataegus is specific to the heart. You want to start moving the toxins out, and then you go intracellular, and those are the homeopathic detoxisodes or detoxifiers. And so the trajectory is this. You give the body a signal, you move toxins out of the cells, they're going to leave and go into the lymph system, which is your garbage collectors, then it goes into your bloodstream. So you're going to want to have a couple of drainage remedies going on at the same time. Then once it's in the bloodstream, you're probably going to want to use an antimicrobial herbal that can break it down. And then at the end of the day, you want to use some kind of sponge to abate it, like diatomaceous earth or clay baths or chlorella. And that's kind of the whole idea behind what you're looking at. So a homotoxicology program would have about 7 or 8 products in that would be doing all 4 of those simultaneously.
So it's working simultaneously on all these different levels within the body, from the extracellular matrix and the tissues to even intracellularly, to help move these toxins out and things like that. Is that correct?
That's right. And the model that Dr. Reckeway created, you can see that if you Google the homotoxicology model. That model really will help you when you're working with your child. And Dr. Reckeway has 6 phases. The first 3 phases are the reaction phases, meaning that the body is able to react to the toxins and mobilize them and get them out. The last 3 phases are the exhaustion phases, where toxins are going in and they're staying in, and it's taking a while if they can ever come out. So the first phase is excretion. So those are the healthiest people on the planet. They can party and eat and do whatever they want, and the next day they're fine, and they can do it all over again, because garbage goes in, garbage goes out, and it doesn't have much of a negative impact on them, if at all. Now, if you can't get the toxins out in excretion, the next deeper phase is inflammation, where the body's putting heat behind the toxin to get it out. That's where all your itises would be. Gastritis, cystitis, tonsillitis, fevers would be in that inflammation category. Now, if you can't get the toxins out in inflammation, the body is too smart to have toxins float around the bloodstream, because the bloodstream is vital for oxygenating our body and feeding our different organ systems, including our brain. So the body's going to tuck it in, and that's going to be the deposition phase, like deposits. So it's going to tuck it away in the extracellular matrix, in the connective tissue, in the fat, That's where all your cysts would be. That category would be where warts are, hemorrhoids. And then when you are eating better, drinking more water, taking more supplementation, resting more, the body goes back into the deposition phase, goes into the inflammation stage, and then into the excretion phase, which could explain why a lot of us get quote-unquote sick after a big test or after a big party, because now we're relaxing and our body is in a safe place and it can start to react to get the toxins to excretion. But if you keep getting loaded up with toxins, the next phase is impregnation. Like the word pregnant, the toxins are loading up and going into the cells. And now that's causing some problems, and the enzymatic processes are diminished. Somebody in their middle age would probably go to see the doctor and say, I'm having trouble sleeping, and I'm getting headaches, and I'm having GI issues, and I'm having anxiety, and I'm getting seasonal allergies, and they don't really see anything, but they mitigate it with, suppressants to kind of get you through the day. The next deeper phase is degeneration, and that's where you're going to get a diagnosis, whether it's a chronic illness like MS or Parkinson's disease, or an autoimmune illness like rheumatoid arthritis and juvenile or diabetes type 2, or if it's going to be a neuropsychiatric disorder like schizophrenia and autism. And then the last phase is neoplasm, and those are all the cancer phases. So in my opinion, if a child is sick enough to get diagnosed with autism, to me it just means that they've been moving down towards degeneration for a long period of time, and now their body's not working very well. And the energetic system is being really, really compromised. The fuel metabolism is really compromised because the toxins are sort of hooking on to the cells and not enabling a proper metabolic system to occur.
So let's take for an example, because there's these different phases that you mentioned. Let's take for example, you have someone comes to you and they say, my child I know has mercury poisoning, and I only want you to detox him from mercury. Why is that not such a good idea without going through some of these phases?
Because, they say that everybody on the planet has at least 250 synthetic chemicals in their fat and connective tissue. So probably all of us have mercury in our system. We all have PCBs, we all have everything in our fat and connective tissue at this point. What I found is that the man-made chemicals and the heavy metals and the pesticides and all that are suppressing the immune system the most. And from that, you're going to get a secondary microbial overgrowth, because now the body is in where microbes can become opportunistic. So for instance, like I said, if you pass away and you have zero energy, your body's going to be taken over by a microbial overgrowth of 100%. So if your body's working at 50% because of the suppressions of all these xenobiotics, you're going to have a 50% microbial overgrowth. So you don't want to go after the big guns at first, because when you pull that out, all the microbes are going to come out with you. And then you run into having what they call in homeopathy a healing crisis. And so the most important thing is that you want to do this as gently as possible, and you want to give the body a chance to get these toxins out, because the body wants to get them out. It just doesn't have the strength and energy to do it. It's wired to get these toxins out. We have millions of years of evolution that knows how to do it. So the most important thing that I learn from all this, and what I tell the parents, is that you want the primary pathways of elimination to be in charge. So the primary pathways will include the liver through the gallbladder, and the colon through stool, the kidneys through urine, the skin through sweat, the lungs through respiration. So for me, these kids are little septic tanks, and we're poking holes in it. So the stinkier, the smellier, the grosser, the mucousier the stool, the more stuff is coming out in that bowl, the better. Because my feeling is that they're detoxing autism. The same with the urine. The more frequent the urine, the smellier the urine, the murkier the urine, great. But if those systems can't keep up, then the skin is going to have to take over, because they call the skin the third kidney. So you might have eczema and rashes, and that means we're going a little too quickly. Or anything the neck up, strep throat, runny nose, ear infections, eye gook, we're going too quickly. Lungs through respiration is fine, but if they start to do a lot of coughing, you don't want it to turn into bronchitis. So those are all the little tips that you want to know how quickly and slowly you're going, and you just kind of want to take it one step at a time. And then towards the end of the program is when you get into heavy metals and chemicals. And the nice thing too is that when the body starts to eliminate, it starts to get rid of those things anyway. You don't necessarily need to target them with detoxisodes that are looking for those specific things. The body knows it shouldn't be in there. It starts moving it out. So in homotoxicology, even though you're going very simply and easily at the beginning, it's almost like opening up the floodgates. A lot of toxins come out at the beginning, and when you finally get to the end of the program, heavy metals and radiation and whatever, the body's probably mobilized 60 or 70% of it, and the kids seem to get through it pretty easily.
So let's say that a parent brings a child to you, you start on your program of homotoxicology, you've got some various homeopathic remedies, all these various names that you've talked about of remedies, and then 2 weeks later they call and they say, oh my gosh, my child is a disaster. They are bouncing off the walls, they are emotional, their poop is crazy, all kinds of troubles. What would you tell me?
Well, because I'm a homeopath and not a medical doctor, I always want the parents to use their best instincts. So if they think that the child has a sore throat and it's strep, by all means go and see your doctor and make sure that it isn't something above and beyond just a simple little cold. But generally speaking, you're going to want to slow everything down. You're going to want to put the drainage remedies and the homeopathics, if they have the homeopathic detoxifiers, if they happen to be on them. You can put it actually on the wrist because the signals get through the skin. But I work low potency. I'm not working high potency. The highest potency I work with is a 200x. So within a couple of days of slowing everything down, you can get the child back to baseline. So the way I work is it's like digging a little bit every single day. You're not going to see a lot the first 3 or 4 days, but after 6 months of digging a little bit, you have a pretty big hole. But the high potency clearings that they do in cease and sequential homeopathy, I'm not working on that level. Not that I'm against it. I love those therapies, and I've done them with my children. But I found that if you do drainage first, and then you do low potency detoxifiers, that's going to just make sequential and cease so much easier because the body can, again, tune into those high potency signals, and you're not going to have a big detox reaction from them.
So that's what I want to know is what was happening to my child at that time? Why was he so out of control?
Well, what's going on is that the cells are now mobilizing these toxins. It's getting into the bloodstream, and it's things that have been tucked away for months or even years are now being pushed out to a more superficial level. And it's going through all the primary organs, so you have to literally relive your medical history when you do homotoxicology. So the hair, the blood, the urine, and stool, if you do any testing for it, it's going to be loaded with a lot of toxins, and that's stressful. So you just want to go really slowly, and you kind of want to just enable the body to start detoxifying on its own, and use these signals and use these drainers just to enhance their own internal mechanism of detoxification.
So Mary, why don't you give me some of the biggest things that you're seeing today that parents really need to pay attention to with their children that they're not doing? Maybe it's the cellular towers and the Wi-Fi signals. What are some of the big issues that they're not addressing with their kids these days that you see?
Well, if I could go back in time and do things differently myself, the first thing I would have done before I got pregnant was to detox. Because then I wouldn't be passing down all those chemicals in utero and through the breast milk. And I would want my husband to detox too. The other thing too is once the baby's born, I just found through all the histories of all these parents, including the story we went through, is that if a child gets constipated as an infant, that's a big red flag. Things are backing up, and that's putting stress in the body. So you need to find a good MD or a naturopath or a homeopath that knows how to put a few drainage remedies on the wrist of the baby, or give them a probiotic or something to get those bowels moving. Because that's really where I think a lot of this is starting, is when the garbage is going in and it's really causing a lot of problems. And then also to really look into casein and gluten. Those a lot of kids, once they're done breastfeeding, those foods are very inflammatory, and it can set up a lot of problems. So the food is another big thing too. So those, I think, are the most important things that I would like a parent to know with small children before getting pregnant. I think that a lot of this is preventable.
Now, let's say someone comes to you and they've been through your program for maybe a year or two or however long it takes, and you're kind of reaching the end. They've made some good progress. Well, what other therapies out there do you like? What would you then say, hey, let's try this?
So now, okay. So now they're unblocked. And now the tag on the back of their shirt's driving them nuts. Now they don't want to wear their pants. And now they don't want to wear shoes because they're feeling this for the first time. I mean, it drives the parents crazy too because it's cold outside. They don't want to wear a coat. Before, they didn't even know they had a coat on. So you're going to have to do like some kind of body work to get the nervous system more mature, because now it's really feeling everything. So Muscatova or Handle or MovePlayThrive.com is a new program that was created called Sonia's Story. And that Danielle, all those can help get that nervous system more developed. And then they're going to learn language like a foreign language because they miss that language piece. These kids, what I found is that when they're under massive adrenal stress, they're going to memorize everything with their eyes, and they're going to shut their ears down. So they're compensating, and if you don't fix that, they're always going to look autistic. Even though they might not be autistic anymore, that's how they're going to look. So you've got to start teaching them language, and they're going to start with one-word sentences, and then they're going to have two-word sentences, and then you've got to figure out, how am I going to teach this kid prepositions and pronouns and conjugations of verbs? So you have to look into like the Laureate Reading Program and Linda Mood Bell and Kumon and all those learning programs. Even the Rosetta Stone, teaching a child language like a foreign language. Because if they don't know the past and the future tenses of verbs, then they're always going to be in the present, and they're always just going to say their wants. I want juice, I want milk, I want this, I want that. And they're going to get out of that. And then they have to get comprehension in. And that's where we did something called the Aerosmith program. And that was a program developed by Barbara Aerosmith, and it's about 40 years old. She did a TED Talk in Canada, if anybody wants to check it out. But literally, they rewire your brain so they can see where the compensations are occurring, and then they can work on all the weaknesses. So, humans, we take the path of least resistance. So it's easier to memorize with our eyes and to think in pictures. That's how we're going to work and communicate and navigate through the world. It's hard to use your ears. It's hard for us if we had to, have this conversation in Spanish. It's just a lot of brain work that our parts of our brain aren't used to using. But the Aerosmith program, we sent our son up there for 2 years, and he it was nothing short of a miracle. And they're in the United States now. They're in 11 schools, and they're at the Easton Country Day School in Connecticut, and now they're finally working with high-functioning autistic and Asperger's children too. But they work with young adults. My son was 19 when he did the program, and there was a 40-year-old that was in his program. So it's never too late to change the brain. The brain is very plastic. And I feel like homotoxicology is going to help them get that brain working better, get the toxins out, get the cell-to-cell communication going, so that if your work body is working close to 100%, you're going to really run with the ball. If you're working still at 40%, every therapy is only going to work at that 40% capacity, and you're going to run out of money, and you're going to run out of time.
Here. So, Mary, you're really wonderful in being able to put the things together from the medical perspective and using homotoxicology and detoxing things from the cellular level and all these other levels. But to have some of these other therapies, once they progress into that area, this is clearly usually only things moms have figured out, right? Tell me more about the Aerosmith program, if you don't mind. What exactly made this so good? And your son was 19, he went through it, and what exactly did it do for him?
Well, what they look at, they say that there's 19 parts of the brain. And Barbara Aerosmith, she is in her 60s now, but in the 70s and the 80s, she was diagnosed with a very severe learning disability. And back then, they said the brain is locked in and it can never change itself. And when she was in her 20s, somebody gave her the book of a Russian soldier, I believe this is the story, named Luria, that had shrapnel in the temporal or sensory, some part of his brain, and he couldn't suddenly read faces, he couldn't do time, he couldn't do simple math problems. And in this diary, he did all these exercises, or showed these exercises, and reconnected his brain. and he was in as an adult. So Barbara, in her 20s, took those exercises and started doing them herself over and over and over and over again. And then all of a sudden her logic started coming in, and she started being able to read books and understanding the content of it. She was able to get in downtown Toronto and figure out her way home. And then she figured out all the different parts of the brain and then the exercises that would complement that. The neuroscientists have been looking at Aerosmith program for many years now. It's embedded in 35 schools in Canada. And like I said, it's in 11 schools now. And I work with a lot of the kids. Once they hit a certain level working with me, and I think that they're good candidates, I have a lot of them that are going to the Aerosmith program, and it's really exciting to see them come back and visit me every 6 weeks and see their progress. And it's nothing short of really remarkable. And I'm sure it's not for everybody, but what I found with autistic kids, again, is that auditory processing piece gets hit the hardest, and nobody really knows how to fix that. And they just keep memorizing with their eyes and getting on the computer and being able to do, 30 steps on the computer, but you ask them, what'd you think about that movie? And they have no idea what you're talking about, right? So, I was thinking I wanted to blindfold my son so it would force his ears to work. But the Aerosmith program, they were able to, they figure that out. They do one program where they catch one eye, and then they have the kids trace certain characters, and that works on exactly the expressive part of the brain. And he did that. My son did that for 2 years, for I think 20 or 30 minutes every day, and then his language started to explode. And then he came back here and he went to college, and he's in the city college right now. But he would have never been able to do it without the Aerosmith program. So really everything builds upon itself. Like, we would have never gotten through this from the beginning if we didn't do the right diet, and then I don't think we would have gotten that far, because the body has to communicate with itself without homotoxicology. And then to clear some of the pharmaceutical interventions that we did, that was sequential homeopathy, or CEAS. I feel like that was very helpful too. And then all the subsequent rehabilitation therapies, and then the good supplements too. I don't think it's a big mystery. It's to rebuild a body that's, full of cellular toxins, and what it does to it to get it turned around.
All right, Mary, so let's go back a little bit more about homotoxicology. I have just a couple questions I want to discuss. How do I know when I'm in homotoxicology that my child's improving? What sort of signs and symptoms are they going to exhibit to me?
Well, when a child comes into my office, I'm going to be looking at a number of things. If their pupils are dilated, or if their skin is very white, if they have low muscle tone, if they're 7 or 8 years old and none of their baby teeth have fallen out yet, if their hair grows very slowly, if their toenails don't grow. Those are all signs, according to Dr. Reckerwait's model, that the body is in exhaustion. And usually that's what the children look like when I see them. I mean, sometimes their bodies, they can be a little heavy or bloated. Again, we're back to a metabolic problem. The body's under stress, and they're not thin, but they're bloated, and they're holding on to a lot of water. So that gives me an idea of where are we on the chart of homotoxicology. And it's particularly helpful if I'm working long distance and I'm on the phone with a parent. Those are the questions I ask. When was the last time your child had a fever? Oh, my son's the healthiest kid in the family. He never gets fevers. He hasn't had a fever since he was 8 months old, and he's 7 years old right now. Now that would be a red flag of homotoxicology, because remember, fevers are in that inflammation part of the phase. It's number 2 in the reaction phases. Getting a fever is a sign of health. You need a lot of strength to have a fever. Or I could say, your son's 8 years old, how many baby teeth have fallen out? Well, it's really funny you should say that. Only one of them has fallen out. Well, a lot of times the kids aren't strong enough to form permanent teeth to even push out those baby teeth. So do you ever use sunscreen on your child? No, my other kids, they just hit the sun and they break out in a huge, sunburn. This one, never. I don't even have to slather anything on him. He's just white all summer long. These are all signs of this is a really toxic. And then if I talk to a mom and she says, oh yeah, I have a son or a daughter and he has eczema over 90% of his body, typically those kids are high functioning because they're using their skin as their colon. So those are the things that you want to see shift. So, for instance, I had a 9-year-old and none of the baby teeth fell out. And within 6 weeks, 3 baby teeth fell out. And he came in and he has a smile and he has, you see these big spaces in his mouth. Parents now are calling me up so excited this summer, sending me pictures of their suntan children and winning suntan, contests. He's never had a suntan before. So, parents need to know what to look for, and then they're excited to see it. Or if they mount a little fever, they're thrilled because these are the kids that, with all the other kids in the autism world that are responding to the methyl B12 and hyperbaric oxygen and sort of the mainstays, these kids, a lot of them don't. And they're like, this is the first time I've seen my child react to anything. But you have to warn them that, because they won't know these are good things to see. They would think a little fever would be a good sign of health, or that all your teeth are falling out simultaneously. But if you warn them in advance, then they celebrate those victories, and then they're excited to see it. And then the kids just get stronger, and they start to grow, and their hair starts to grow, and they don't have that straw hair anymore, and their pupils aren't constantly dilated. You see that their pupils are looking, it's a normal size now. They're just not running on cortisol, right? Because if your body's not working very well, and your fuel metabolism is compromised, you're using your adrenals all the time to kick out more sugar through cortisol. Well, after a while, your adrenals get spent, and then you don't even have enough left to bring your pupils back down when you go out in the sun. So all these kids are walking outside, and they have to wear sunglasses. So you want to have the bottom line is their blood sugar has to be better because their fuel metabolism is needs to be fixed. And those are going to show up in many different ways. If your blood sugar is at a good place, you're going to be able to sleep through the night because you're not constantly kicking out cortisol all night long. I mean, a lot of these kids get night terrors. They're getting night terrors because they have to. They're having probably big meltdowns in the middle of the night because they're kicking out cortisol because they probably have a dangerously low blood sugar because their liver can't kick out glycogen fast enough. A lot of these kids don't like protein, so they're eating a carbohydrate meal that breaks down to sugar very quickly, and then they're running out of fuel at 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning. So the parents, it empowers them because now they know what to look for. They start to understand why the child's having a meltdown. I get calls from the parents and they say, well, he had a meltdown at school. Usually it's at 10 o'clock in the morning or 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Either they didn't have any breakfast or they didn't want to eat their lunch, or they had too much sugar in their lunch, they released too much insulin, and then they bottomed out and having a low blood sugar. And putting snacks in between 10 and 2 and making sure that they get them, that can really help these, stopping these meltdowns.
Yeah, that's great information. These warning signs. So let's just talk about that for a second. So, a parent saying, I'm not sure if, what my son's problems really are, but, he goes out in the sun, he never gets sunburned. It doesn't matter if it's 100 degrees, he never gets sunburned. Or the baby teeth. Can you give me some of those other warning signs that, hey, this is, this kid is really toxic. He's not operating the way he should be.
Yeah, I mean, we're in that exhaustion phase, so they're not reacting, right? So they're not, a lot of them don't get earwax after a while. A lot of them don't get a goopy, awful, runny nose. They don't. A lot of them, they have a white tongue because their immune system is working so poorly and the microbes are becoming opportunistic. Bad breath, bad gas. That's just all signs that, that they're little chia pets inside. And the microbes are becoming, are kind of taking over this really exhausted body. So the most important thing is reactions. If you've got a cold, your husband has a cold, or your daughter has a cold, you want that child with ASD to getting a cold too. It's not good that they're not getting sick. You want to hear that a bunch of kids got the flu in school. You want your child to get the flu too, because that means the body's cleaning house. Reactions have a meaningful biological reason for this to happen.
Okay, Mary, we've covered some great things here. I'm really excited about this. One last question that I wanted to discuss. You mentioned the pupils, how they constrict and they dilate, and a lot of this is probably a sympathetic nervous system that's stuck in sort of a hyperdrive. Sleeping.
You're starting to get fuzzy.
That so many
Amy,
parents, some parents may have not slept in years. What can we do to help these kids sleep?
Oh, is it off? Yeah, sleep is such a big issue for these kids. I would always suggest that they give the kids a protein snack before they go to bed, because protein converts into sugar very, very slowly, and only about 50% of protein will turn into sugar. The other thing that you want to do is to look into amino acids. You know, some of the kids have trouble with them, and sometimes you have to detox a little bit before you get into them. But 5-HTP, that can help bring up the serotonin and bring down some of the excitatory neurotransmitters. That can be very helpful too. In taurine and glycine, there's a couple of things that can really make a difference. My son did very well with Cerebral Calm and Travacor, which have a little bit of 5-HTP in it. And we were able to get him off of melatonin and kind of segue over to the amino acids. I wouldn't give any of the homeopathic or the detoxification products too close to bedtime, because this is stimulating. So again, everything's going to go into the bloodstream, and it can be pretty disruptive. So some kids with homotoxicology, they can only handle the products once in the morning. And some of them can handle it once in the morning and maybe again after school, but never close to bedtime. I found that can be really disruptive.
Sometimes we get a little concerned about, oh, you know, my kid can't sleep without taking melatonin or without taking this. Is it okay for some of these things to be given on a long-term basis, or should we alternate them?
Well, that's probably a better question, I guess, to ask their doctor. But they're not going to work that well if you don't get the adrenals under control, you know, because if they keep releasing cortisol all night long, it's hard for anything to work. Or giving them food that they're sensitive to and it's causing adrenal stress, and they're waking up all the time. I mean, I feel comfortable with amino acids because that's basically protein. You know, I feel pretty comfortable with that. But in general, as the body gets healthier and healthier and healthier and healthier, and the blood sugars are getting better regulated, you're not going to need all that. And I found that a lot of the kids, they're more interested in protein. Once you start to, I mean, if your body's working at a very low capacity, like if you missed lunch and breakfast, at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you don't feel like a big piece of chicken. You want something that's going to break down the sugar quickly. You want a Snickers bar, you want some juice. That's what you're going to want to eat. That's what you're going to want to eat. Once you start to detox and all those enzymes start to open up, then the foods start to, in many cases, not everyone, every child, it starts to appeal to the child now, so that they don't have to keep running on these foods that convert to sugar so quickly. They can eat foods that convert more slowly into sugar, and then that can help the metabolic system and kind of keep them from bouncing up and down, medicating themselves with sugar all day long.
Very good, Mary. Mary, I want to thank you so much for coming on to our summit. It's really been great to have you. Some great stories, some great information. I hope to meet with you again sometime in the future. Thanks so much.
Great. Thanks so much, Nick.